It is almost time for the Iron Skillet, one of the last ones possibly for the foreseeable future. We have a great guest who's going to give us the scoop on SMU and everything we need to know going into this ball game. Locked On Horned Frogs starts now.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also find us wherever it is you get podcasts in its audio form. Special guest today, you see him in the box next to me if you're watching on YouTube, Billy Embody, at Billy Embody on Twitter, or I guess X is what it's called now. I still refer to it as Twitter. But he works for On3, did great work for a long time for the 247 Sports Network. He's now with On3 and covers SMU as well as LSU. And so, Billy, a lot of different ways we could start with the Mustangs, but I think the way to go first is they're going to be in a power conference soon. You know, next year they're going to be an ACC team along with Stanford and Cal. What does that mean for this program? And just, I know they had kind of a unique way of going about it. They've already raised a lot of money in the past week or so. How did this sort of all come together for them in getting that seat at the table finally?
Yeah, it's been quite the whirlwind for SMU to get into the ACC. You know, over the course of last year, all indications were they were going to be going to the Pac-12. But the way SMU handled it is really as well as any school could have, because they weren't left out in the cold as the Pac-12 was, you know, starting that decline and that train wreck. Mm-hmm. They were ready, and that was because they spent, you know, the entire year meeting with power brokers at other schools from Pac-12 to ACC to trying with the Big 12 as well. But the ACC is really where SMU and a lot of the leadership really circled and said, that's where we want to be, because there are so many academic institutions in that conference that, you know, line up with SMU a little bit more. They see a school like a Duke where they have that smaller student body, but maybe, you know, obviously that incredible basketball history, and now they're kind of catching on a little bit with football. That's kind of where SMU says, hey, we could kind of do that, but we can do it in Dallas. And so that's been their pitch. This is the season where SMU needs to kick the door down and win a conference championship. It would help and go a long way if they beat TCU as well. But, you know, around the whole push was centered around SMU is as invested as a college program can be. And you look at some of the schools around the country that are routinely the cellar dwellers, maybe outside of a flash in the pan, like a Rutgers or a Boston College and schools across the country in different conferences. SMU is far more committed to at least trying to win than those schools are. They've just kind of been that just bowl team, you know, for the last however many years. And so it's been a difficult road to get all the things in place, but between the facilities, with just $200 million of facilities for the football team alone going up in the last few years, to NIL being a huge piece now, coaching salaries, money raised, being in Dallas, all of those things have been kind of snowballing. And now that snowball needs to pick up a football team that wins a conference championship. That's the reality of it. But it was a lot of hard work, but it's all about the vision for SMU that is just in the era of have-nots and haves. The way TCU went about it, SMU was behind. They hadn't caught on that football is the way to build a stronger university and get into a power conference. They hadn't caught on yet. And as the haves and the have-nots started to separate more and more, it's harder to kick that door down. And that's why it's so important for SMU to do that this year in the AAC before they get to the ACC. But they have a vision for what they want in their athletic department, and they've got the money, they've got the facilities now. And so to have the power conference logo backing them is really huge for the university.
You mentioned the investment, and I mean, they really started making waves on the recruiting trail with Sonny and Rashad Samples and that staff. They've continued that. It seems like the portal's been really beneficial for them. But there have been a lot of schools that haven't like embraced the NIL world fully. And of course, with SMU, I mean, there's some jokes there given their background, but the bottom line is they're willing to spend the money. They have people that are willing to invest there. So what is this, coupled with the resources they have and now that affiliation with the ACC, how is that going to impact how they recruit moving forward?
Yeah, it is really a huge boost. And I mean, they picked up a 4-star wide receiver for the class of 2025 just a couple weeks after the ACC announcement. They picked up Brandon Booker from DeSoto, who's teammates with Davion Singleton, the 4-star 2025 wide receiver, who was committed to Stanford at one point. He ended up, I think, not getting in. And so that left a really good prospect on the table who's able to stay home. He was committed to Baylor at one point, so he ends up at SMU now. And so we're seeing them gain momentum, especially in the class of 2025. With a lot of these guys, there's some top targets out there that would really make some serious waves recruiting wise for SMU. And the reality is right now they're not getting these high school prospects with much NIL. Mm-hmm. It's just not a thing. They don't want that to be the focal point because they've seen it where you reward a either young football player with NIL for not doing anything at all. And all of a sudden your NIL is tied up with guys that haven't proven anything on the college level. They'd rather do that with transfers, which just in the first 24 hours after the ACC news, an already strong collective that SMU has raised $100,000 in 24 hours, which just shows people have been waiting for that reason to really support athletics at SMU. Mm-hmm. And the NIL collectives that SMU has form a top 20 collective before the ACC news came. So I expect them to grow and get stronger. And on the high school recruiting trail, now a lot of those prospects that maybe would have stayed home and played if not for the conference affiliation, now they don't have that reason not to anymore, which is huge.
Turning to the game that's going to happen Saturday. So, I mean, Preston Stone was a highly rated guy. He's been patient the last few years. It's his team now. They hung around that game against Oklahoma. Didn't have the best night offensively, but they put up some big points against La Tech and Prairie View. How would you assess just his first, 3 games as a starter as he's kind of come into this QB1 role?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. We've seen him make some pretty incredible throws and make some plays in critical moments. And last week they played Prairie View A&M. A lot of things were easy for the most part. He did have an interception. He kind of just missed. Roger Daniels kind of put it behind him a little bit. It pops up in the air and ends up being intercepted. But other than that, I mean, he was 75% completion percentage through, I think, 4 or 5 touchdowns, 300 yards on the button. But against Oklahoma, he was faced with much more pressure, obviously, an OU front that was facing an SMU offensive line without 2 starting offensive linemen. So they were able to kind of take advantage of that, get some pressure on him. He still was able to avoid sacks. He extends plays really well. But you do look at some of the moments where he's missed an open receiver deep and hasn't connected. That's where the offense is maybe just off just a touch. Mm-hmm. This week, they're really hoping that kind of having that clean game they had against Prairie View A&M brings them to that next level where they can hit those explosives when they get opportunities, because TCU's defense is really good at keeping them in front of them for the most part. And so if SMU can't take advantage of them, it's just going to be that much harder to move the football on Joe Gillespie's defense. The run game's kind of been hit or miss too, so you don't want Preston Stone to have to do it all himself. But when he's been given these opportunities, it's been kind of a mixed bag of him hitting them versus not. He has a really talented receiver core that can make plays after the catch. We've seen that a good bit. But with the offense, they're missing that explosive downfield passing game, and it's just off by just a touch right now. And against TCU, it's going to be another good test. If they can hit some of those explosives, SMU has a chance to play very well offensively and really put TCU's defense in some tough spots.
When we come back, Sonny Dykes said this week he thought this was the most talented TCU team in a long time. So I'll ask Billy about that and more on Locked On Horned Frogs. A quick ad break here. Do want to mention Jase Medical. You can go to jasemedical.com and get their Jase case. 5 life-saving antibiotics. You don't want to be in an emergency situation, but if you are, don't be caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jase case started during the pandemic with so many people at home. They thought about giving people, supplies and ways that they can help themselves, even if they can't always get to a hospital. You can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off if you use the promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. That's JASE Medical.com. Get the Jase case today, $20 off if you use the promo code LOCKEDON. We thank Jase Case for being a sponsor of the Locked On Network. Yeah, so this week in his press conference, Billy Sonny was talking about this SMU team, and he said it was the most talented group he'd seen in a long time. He felt like when he watched them, physically against Oklahoma, he didn't see a huge difference between what SMU was doing or just how they were built and how Oklahoma was built. This defense, I know they did a lot of work in the portal and got better. Is this the reason why SMU fans are optimistic about their chance of the American Conference because of the upgrades they made on that side of the ball this offseason?
Yeah, I've been kind of telling anyone that would listen, hey, this SMU defense, and this is dating back before the season, they've got a lot of the pieces to be pretty darn good. And right now they're top 40 in yards per play allowed. They're, I think, right around top 25 in yardage given up. But this defense is built on the defensive line. They added Jordan Miller, a huge nose tackle, Elijah Roberts, a big, strong side defensive end. And they've got returners like Devere Levelston and Elijah Chapman, as well as some edge rushers and Nelson Paul and Cam Robertson. But then the back end has some Power 5 transfers in Jonathan McGill at safety, Charles Woods from West Virginia at corner, and then Chris Meganson comes over from Liberty to start at corner. And they just have built a ton of depth in that secondary. So it's a defense that is playing much better. They still have to clean up some tackling here and there. And I felt like against Oklahoma, the Sooners were able to have some drives that they really extended, and that kind of hurt them a little bit in tackling. It was hot out there. They get tired. It'll be hot again on Saturday at 11 a.m., or especially in the second half, I would say. But this is a defense that has stayed relatively healthy, and their kind of question mark has been linebacker, but those guys have played pretty well overall. So they have stepped up in a big way, especially when you look at that OU game and the offense wasn't clicking as much. And against Louisiana Tech, the offense, I think they only got had 7 points in the second half. So there's a lot of right things going on with the defense.
Yeah, you talked earlier. I mean, I don't want to disparage the SMU offense. It's kind of been odd to me looking at it this week because I feel like when I think about SMU in the past, my first thought is big-time skill guys, like typically a good quarterback, high flying offensively, and they have those pieces. But you mentioned the downfield passing game being a little bit of a wait-and-see type of situation so far. Do they have an alpha wide receiver? I mean, I know Jake Bailey's kind of their leader. Of course, Jordan Hudson who came over from TCU, he's put up some good stats as well. Do they have like a guy that is their go-to player, or are they still kind of trying to sort of feel that out early in the season?
Yeah, I think right now we could call Jake Bailey the go-to guy in that slot. Him and Preston Stone have a really good relationship, and he's been productive, but he's still a slot. And so it's kind of one of those things where SMU through the years has always had that outside dude that can go. Reggie Robertson, Rasheed Rice, I mean, just Danny Gray, Cortland Sutton, the kind of the list goes on. This year, what they're waiting on is, and it kind of happened a little bit last week, Jordan Curley has not emerged as that dude that, I mean, I thought he was going to be, everybody thought he was going to be going into the season. And so for him to come out last week, I know it's Prairie View A&M, but for him to get a 20-yard reception, that was a tough grab, 4-yard slant for a touchdown, catch a short pass, break some tackles, 59-yard touchdown. Those kind of little confidence boosters can maybe help him break out because he has the speed. He had an opportunity against Louisiana Tech in week 1, dropped the deep ball, down the field. So he hasn't just clicked just yet. He has that ability to be that guy. And then the other one that I think is really in need of more snaps is Jordan Hudson. I mean, I think he's so competitive on balls down the field. Anytime they send him deep, something good happens, or send him down the field. He opened the scoring on the year for SMU, I think a 67-yard touchdown reception against Louisiana Tech. And then against Prairie View A&M, he opened the scoring on a fade route there. So they have to get him the ball, and he was kind of nicked up against OU. I thought that might be a coming out opportunity for him, but now he's healthy, was able to play against Prairie View A&M. So having him back in the fold is important. I'd like to see them kind of force feed it a little bit to him, and then they do have Moochie Dixon, who's been pretty like solid, reliable receiver that they've been able to get the ball to. So they have a lot of options. They really need somebody to just go off this week too, just to maybe feel a little bit better about where the position's at.
Okay, Billy, you can air it out here. You can give it to us. What are your thoughts on the Iron Skillet being paused? I know you had, a reaction when that news came down initially. What do you think about TCU essentially kind of, I guess, putting a stop to this for this foreseeable future in a few years?
I just think I love college football rivalries. I do.
Right,
I mean, I love even Oregon State and Washington and UW. I mean, like those ones that most of us probably here in the region don't watch that often. I mean, I'm just all about it. I would rather watch a rivalry game than, maybe some solid just matchup of non-conference teams. And so for me, across college football, I hate it. I hate Texas A&M not playing for as long as they didn't. I thought that was stupid. And I just think it's pretty stupid that SMU isn't going to play TCU. I mean, the travel doesn't get any better than that. I mean, it's a game that's been played for 100 years. It's seen some teams go on some runs. It's seen an up SMU team. It's seen a down TCU team. We've seen it get a little bit more competitive as of late. It's spicy right now too. And I know TCU's thinking about the student or the season ticket holders and wanting more home games, but now it's instead of playing Nichols or Tarleton, you just play an ACC SMU team. And on top of that, Sonny Dykes is a big proponent of what's best for the student athletes. Well, not putting them on a plane or whatever, is great and all, but you could, if you bring in a good home and home, then you got to go somewhere farther. That's a farther flight or whatever for student athletes. So putting them on a bus and going 45 minutes, staying in your usual team hotel to play SMU every other year it's not a bad thing. And so I know people think it's from the SMU angle, just like, crying about it or whatever. It's just like, it's a good rivalry. It makes sense. It's plug and play. Just don't overthink it. I mean, that's my thoughts. And that applies to any rivalry. If Clemson and South Carolina stop playing, or Florida and Florida State stop playing, I mean, I would have the exact same take on those. So it is what it is, though. It's just, it was funny to hear also Sonny Dykes' comments about how North Texas was just as big of a game when he was here at TCU. I mean, I love Sonny. I think I got a good relationship with him, but sometimes some of the things I'm like, man, it's just so quickly you forget. But
and I understand why they're doing it. I think especially eventually the Big 12 could go to like a 10-team conference schedule, which is a factor there. I think initially TCU fans were excited because it was like, okay, this means we're bringing in, whoever, blue blood X. I think it's going to become more. Well, right now they're bringing in Arkansas State. We'll see what they do kind of down the road. I guess I will ask you this, though. Do you feel like SMU has any different perspective on it now that they're moving to the ACC? I mean, do you feel like if you got an honest moment with the power brokers there, would they still want to play it every year? Or do you think this move also puts them in a position where they see kind of, the value of not having it?
I think this stems a lot from just the confidence and maybe the trajectory of SMU right now with NIL, with, the team. Rhett Lash is the first coach to lead them to a bowl game in his first season since the 1980s. I mean, there's a lot of positivity around the program right now. They still got to go out and accomplish it on the field, but SMU wants to play this game. I mean, power
Okay.
brokers do, school does, players do, fans do, and that's pretty much where it is. And I think for me, like in terms of college football playoff access, you can do it a bunch of different ways, right? Like if TCU plays 3 non-conference home games a year and they're all against some random FCS or super low G5, then they can run through the Big 12 too if they have that type of a team. And getting the college football playoff is like what I guess maybe the 11th, or I guess if they go undefeated, they'd be like top 5, top 4. But you're not going to have you're not going to have much credit, especially since OU, Texas are going to SEC. You're just going to be the team that just found your way in. And I think if you play a marquee non-conference game or even 2, you bolster your resume. If you go 1 for 2 in those, you're still going to get in to the college football playoff if you win your league. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So I don't know. If I was a season ticket holder, I'd want a great schedule. I mean, you want like some throwaway games where you don't want to worry about it, but I would rather pay good money to see good teams. But that's just me.
Yeah, and I mean they got like North Carolina, Stanford coming in the next few years, so I guess that's sort of the thought process. But we'll we'll take one more break and we'll wrap up with Billy mentioned the juice. I want to know how the people of SMU feel about Sonny these days, so we'll talk about that next on Lockdown Horned Frogs. Quick word from our folks at FanDuel. NFL season's going on right now. Week 3 starts tonight. You can if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and put a $5 bet down, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. You can bet on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official betting partner of the NFL, and we thank them for their sponsorship here on the Locked On Network. All right, so Billy, we know last year's game in Dallas, there was so much buildup because Sonny was coming back, and obviously SMU fans were not happy with him. I know this game's in Fort Worth. What's the general? I mean, what's the vibe now? Are people still pretty red hot about how all that went down with Dykes and moving to TCU? Has that cooled off at all? What's the sense you get from SMU and just how much they want to win this football game?
There's still plenty of hate. I think I will say this about SMU fans. It'll be very interesting to see what happens long-term with Sonny Dykes once it's fully his roster and all those things. But I mean, they can read like some coaches pretty good. Like they knew Chad Morris wasn't going to do anything at Arkansas. They, saw the June Jones collapse coming, things like that. And with Sonny, I think the thing that aggravates them the most is some of the, I don't know. And it's definitely every head coach will pander to their fan base. I totally believe that, get it, understand it. But
sure,
when Sonny left SMU for TCU, the whole idea that they weren't going after players, they weren't sticking around and leaving mid-season to, finish it out the right way and do all that. No, they were, Rashad Samples, love him to death, but they were having conversations with SMU players about going over to Fort Worth. I mean, there's a lot out there about that move that there's pictures, there's screenshots, there's all this stuff that would be pretty damning, quite honestly. And I think that's where a lot of the kind of hate stems from, is a lot of people on SMU's side knowing that and then hearing they didn't want to come and meet me at this or the end zone complex. I couldn't get it in writing that it'd be broken ground on January 1st and all of this. And it's now the end zone complex is less than a year away from opening. And obviously they've gone to the ACC now. Just all of these things that Sonny has said. And some of it is like just little snipes, but I think that's kind of exacerbated it a little bit more since he's been at TCU. But people also, I think, have hate for him because he's a good coach too. I mean, this isn't like Chad Morris. When Chad Morris left, a lot of people were like, all right, well, this is good. They can go out and hire somebody who knows how to hire a coaching staff that's, has a defensive coordinator and this and that. And Sonny Dykes comes in and does that. There were still holes that needed to be filled in the program. But I think that's where some of the hate lies from. It's the combination of Sonny Dykes being very good at SMU, there's also the, just how he left and how he had so much time to leave and kind of burn the program on the way out, and some of the staff in particular. That is where I think we see a lot of the anger coming from for the most part. But people are very happy with Rhett Lashley. I mean, he came in and, led them to a bowl game in year one. Usually SMU has been a team that, even if you've seen the coach build off of, the overall progress with the program, you usually take your lumps in year one and don't go to a bowl. And Rhett Lashley was able to do that despite having, 2 losses in the non-conference slate and all 3 of the preseason top 3 AAC opponents on the schedule. So they feel good about the direction of the program. And so there's that aspect. There's just, they want to beat TCU. That's it. But I do think the amount of time that Sonny was on SMU's campus and going to TCU at the same time was, and especially how the season ended, SMU was top 25 or whatever. And it was obviously nasty. If there was a way to go back and redo it, I'd imagine Sonny would have left like Joey McGuire did, left Baylor midseason for Texas Tech and just, punted. But it's been a galvanizing moment for SMU. NIL is where it is because of Sonny Dykes. The football facility is being built because of Sonny Dykes. And so SMU fans are pretty happy in that sense too.
Yeah. Let me share a crackpot theory with you, and then we'll talk about keys to the game before we go. So, I remember watching, and of course, like we're talking about very different years because they didn't play in 2020, but 2019 and 2021, SMU just came out from the jump in Fort Worth, jumped out the big leads in that game. I know Sonny spent time at TCU in 2017 and has since said like he kind of had his eye on it. Do you feel like part of that, like part of them just coming in there and winning like they did was him auditioning for that job in a way? I know that sounds strange, but it just felt like those teams were so focused. And I know it's a huge rivalry game, but they just had like an extra edge when they played TCU in those 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's a job at the time of when he took SMU and started building it that he wanted. And I would say at TCU, with all that, this is going to light the probably comments on fire, but I think he's auditioning for Texas or Texas A&M. That's just my opinion. And I think with TCU's NIL, he sees where maybe he sees he can bring it to the Big 12 championship game. And we saw that in year one with a lot of Gary's players and, bringing in some other players as well. But one of the reasons why he left SMU was the ceiling. And so if Sonny sees a ceiling at TCU, he's going to be gunning for the 2 flagship jobs. And I know that one of the clauses that he wanted in an SMU contract was for those jobs that he could leave for him. So it is one of those things where I think looking back and knowing certain conversations that were had, even going into the 2021 season with Sonny Dykes and some certain people around the TCU program, that there was unrest with the direction of the program under Gary Patterson, and that Sonny Dykes would be very willing to listen to what they had to say whenever they decided to move on from Gary Patterson. And that's why they made the move so early to get rid of Gary Patterson. And I think it kind of blew up in a weird way where they didn't realize, it would be so obvious that TCU was bringing in Sonny Dykes, but it ultimately was. And, I think if maybe Jeremiah Donati would go back and do it again, he would probably wait till later in the season, but that's just me.
Right.
And yeah, I do think there were a lot of conversations that were had before a 2021 season where Sonny, communicated, whether it be his agent or whoever, that be very interested. And, I think that still stands true with a couple jobs in the state too, long-term.
Yeah, that's intriguing. I appreciate the honesty there. So keys to the game. If SMU is going to pull this off Saturday, Billy, what do they have to do well against this TCU team they're facing Saturday?
Yeah, I really think for both teams, the keys are exactly the same. And for SMU and TCU, whoever capitalizes in the red zone with touchdowns is going to have a really good shot to win this football game. TCU's had their struggles, SMU's had their struggles finishing with touchdowns in the red zone against their FBS opponents in particular. But then you flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and both teams, whoever limits explosive plays is going to be in a good position to win this football game, because you look back on last year's game and it was boiled down in turnovers as well. Tanner Mordecai's backbreaking interception, touchdown. And then 2 75-plus yard explosive plays by TCU. And that's the difference in the game. I think both those drives were either 1 or 2 plays too. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference in the game for SMU last year, is a backbreaking interception and, losing that focus where you were doing a decent job of at least making TCU go down the field on you. And instead you give up 2 explosive plays and you lose on a 1-possession game. So I think whoever limits explosives and kind of makes each other drive down the field that's kind of a recipe for success. And yeah, capitalizing in the red zone. I think we're in for a really good game. I think there's watching SMU's defense against Oklahoma, it just makes me feel like this is going to be maybe a lower scoring Iron Skillet. I think SMU's offense is, the big question here is if they can capitalize on opportunities. Mm-hmm. That might be the difference, because they haven't done that yet. At least against an FBS opponent. So that's going to be what I'm watching. And I know it's super simple and kind of boiled down to that, but I think both these teams have kind of seen not similar, runs this season, but just kind of their questions right now just almost seem a little similar in a weird way as they go into this one.
Well, he's Billy Embody. You can find him on Twitter at Billy Embody, and he covers SMU for On3. Also covers LSU as well. Billy, thank you, man. I hope you enjoy the game Saturday, and thanks for doing this with us.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.